A warning to our listeners, this story includes sexual violence.
And my daughter, she said, "Mom, that's all I want for my 18th birthday. I want to find out who he is." And so I promised her that night, I said, "We will find him." So it didn't quite turn out the way that we thought it would, that anybody thought that it would.
This is Sincerely X, and I'm Sarah Kay. In each episode of our show, we hear a story from an anonymous guest to give light to an idea in hiding. In this episode, our guest is a woman whose adopted daughter desperately wanted to find her birth father. And through DNA technology, our guest was able to track him down. But the technology pointed her to an unexpected outcome, a result that no one saw coming or would have hoped for. Why is it important to you that you be anonymous in speaking with us today?
It's important for me to be anonymous because this involves a story about my daughter. It was important for me to get this story out, but protect my daughter and protect the birth mother, because it's not about names, it's about something much bigger.
As genetic testing has become more available, it has become easier than ever to surface stories and secrets from our family's pasts. But where does one person's story end and another's begin? How do we draw those lines? And what do we do when not everyone wants the same amount of information? How do you decide who owns a story? That's the idea we'll explore today on Sincerely X. To start in the direction of your daughter, I think we should start with talking about her birth mother. So can you describe for me how you met your daughter's birth mother and when you realized that the baby that she was going to give birth to was going to be your daughter? What was that like?
I remember I got this phone call and I walked outside. I remember exactly where I was standing on that day in our yard. I mean, it's kind of to me like a sacred space now on this path between the roses. And it was the attorney, and he said, "There is a baby girl that's going to be born in 5 weeks."
Our guest and her husband were thrilled. They had been waiting for a baby girl. They invited the birth mother to come live with them for the last month of her pregnancy.
We fell in love with her from the beginning. She was kind, generous, an artist, funny.
So when you're in this early time, when she came to live with you, did she have an answer for you about who the birth father was?
She had, her response was one of a little bit of confusion, or I don't know, she kept a diary every day, and I would think, one of these days she's going to let me read that diary, or let my daughter read that diary, and maybe the answer is in that diary. But it was always a question mark in my mind, and it was always a question mark in my daughter's mind. And I came to understand that it was as life-defining for her as it was for my grandmother, never knowing who her birth mother was.
2 generations earlier, our guest's grandmother had gone through a similar experience. Her grandmother never knew who her own birth mother was, and she had no way to find out.
She was taken from her birth mother when she was 1 day old, and her father paid a judge $5 to have the birth mother's name stricken from the birth certificate. He then put her in an orphanage. And when she was 18, she ran away. And she took a train west and fell in love with the gambler on the train, and that was her husband. She ended up having 12 children, but she never knew who her mother was. It colored her life. My mom talks about one time her mother said she was gonna throw herself on the railroad tracks, and these little kids all holding her down. No, Mommy, don't throw yourself on the railroad tracks. It haunted her. It really haunted her. I couldn't fix my grandmother, but I could help my daughter answer those questions.
Our guest did the only thing she could think of to help her daughter find her birth father. She signed her up for DNA testing through a personal genetics website. They hoped that maybe something would come of it. But for years, nothing did.
When my daughter turned 18, or was about to turn 18, I heard her crying in her bedroom, and she was really heart-wrenching crying. And so I ran in and I said, "What? Are you okay? What's the matter?" And she told me that day, a good friend of hers had just met her birth father. And it was a really good day for her friend. And my daughter, her tears were about, she said, "I will never know. I will never know who my birth father is." And then she stopped for a moment and she said, "Mom, I want to find out who he is. I want to know what are the parts of him that I have. I need to know who he is." And so I promised her that night. I said, "We will find him." I called the birth mother and I told her, I think that we have to give her this gift. This is her story and she needs to know. Is there any way that you can tell us, or we can help you find a way to tell us, or what? Because it was just such a big question mark. And she said, I don't know. I honestly don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me either, but I will go back, and if there's anybody it possibly could have been, I will contact them, but I don't think so. At that point, the universe decided to give us a gift.
One day, out of the blue, they received a message through the DNA testing website. A woman had taken a genetic test from the same site and matched with the adopted daughter. They were second cousins. That meant that one of this woman's first cousins could be the girl's birth father.
She was this, nice woman from a Midwest state, really into genealogy, and she was so excited that she was going to be able to maybe help us in this journey. And, the birth mother was excited about that because that was a way to find out, although she didn't really understand it. But, wow, this is somebody that may know.
This woman in the Midwest gave them the names of two of her cousins who had lived in the same state as the birth mother. They were brothers, and she thought that one of them might be the girl's birth father.
So I called up the birth mother and I said, I have these names for you, and they may be the birth father. And I gave her the names on the phone, and silence. She said, "I'm going to have to hang up now, and I'll call you in a few days when I am able, but I have to go now." She called me back, and she said yes, that she knew those two brothers. And she's being kind of broad or circumspect. She's not going into any detail, but just, yes, I know who they are. One of them was away in college, so it couldn't possibly be him. And the other one, I was never with either one of them, ever. I don't understand how this could be. I never even kissed this guy. I never would kiss this guy. I didn't like this guy. He had this house, this big house, and it was the party house. And it was where they would hand out flyers to the freshman girls and have them all come over. And so she said, I went to one of those parties, and I never wanted to go to another one. That was not my scene at all. It was drunken people, young girls, fist fights between guys. It just was not anything that I wanted to do with it. I don't understand. But what she did, what she was able to do, because she'd been living with this confusion for so long already, she said, whatever that is, around, if he is the birth father and DNA shows he is the birth father, we will figure that out as adults. But my daughter's journey to find out who her birth father is, that's separate. I don't want the adult problems to get in the way of her finding her birth father.
At this point, our guest told her daughter that she had found someone who might be the girl's birth father. The daughter had his name, but she was waiting to reach out to him. She didn't want to just contact him out of the blue. They decided that the cousin in the Midwest should call him first.
She said, "You're the father of this baby." The response was not what was expected. He started this laughter, and then he went into denigrating the birth mother. How she slept with everybody and how, she would say no, but she really wanted it. And everybody knew that she was, a bad girl. Everybody knew that. And he was just one of many. It just didn't seem like a right reaction. So I had been on the phone several times with the birth mother through all of this. I called her immediately and I told her exactly what he's told her and the details. And she, if that first horrible silence that she had when she heard the name, it was like that, but maybe even worse, because now the whole picture of it was starting to come out, that there was something really wrong, and why would he say this, and what is he trying to prove, and what happened? She couldn't stay on the phone very long, and she hung up, and she told me right after she hung up, she went and she threw up.
The birth mother didn't see how this guy she barely knew could be the girl's birth father. She called up an old high school friend and explained the situation to him, hoping that maybe he could give her some clarity.
She called him right up and she said, "I don't even understand how it could ever be that this is the birth father. I was never with this guy. I was never at a place where it would have just been the two of us, ever." And this friend of hers said, "Hold on. There was one time." He said, "Don't you remember you got so wasted after just one drink so we decided that we were just going to stay at the house. You were so out of it that I actually had to carry you up the stairs and put you in the bed in the attic. And then I went back downstairs and played pool. That's when it must have happened."
The picture of what had happened was starting to come into focus. The birth mother had only had one drink. She couldn't remember anything from that night. Her friend had left her in bed, thinking that she would be safe. Now, 20 years later, she was realizing that she wasn't.
She never had that recognition that she even suspected that something had happened.
When you heard that, what did you think and what did you feel?
I think that my mother instincts kicked in immediately. And, I wanted to protect my daughter. And my first thought was, she can never know this. What was important to her was to find her birth father so she would know what part of him she gets, who she is of him. And this is going to color who she thinks that she is.
Even though our guest's first instinct was to protect her daughter from the truth, she sought out other opinions. She talked to psychologists and experts and rape counselors. Her question for them was always the same. Now that she had this information, what should she do with it?
Everyone always said what I really knew in my heart already, which is, you cannot keep someone's story from them. She was entitled to know everything about who she is, how she was conceived, who her birth father is. That's her story. I had no right to keep her story from her.
Coming up, we'll hear what happens when our guest's daughter reaches out to her birth father for the first time. And we'll dig deeper into the ethical questions surrounding these genetic technologies. I'm Sarah Kay, and this is Sincerely X. We've been listening to the story of an anonymous mother who tracked down her daughter's birth father with the help of new DNA technology. But with this discovery came a horrible secret, and the revelation of this secret changed the lives of everyone involved. Up until this point, your daughter knew that the birth father had been located. She knew that he had been told that she existed. So she was sitting around thinking, all right, I know who he is. At some point, I'll get the chance to reach out and talk to him.
Well, she did reach out. She sat down and composed a letter to him. Really, sweet letter about, I know this is coming as a shock to you. This is who I am. And she wrote, some of the things that she liked to do and introducing herself as a person. She wrote that before we knew what the scenario really was. She got a response from him that she kind of didn't know what to make of. It was basically, don't call me, I'll call you, but a little bit nicer language than that. She tried not to be really disappointed in that, and so she would read it and try to find words in there that were a little more comforting, and what did he really mean by this? And she was trying to make it out as more of a accepting letter than what it really was and what she came to see it as being.
His response was lukewarm at best, but he did agree to take a DNA test, and the test confirmed it. He was the girl's birth father. Once they knew for sure, our guest and the birth mother agreed that they had to tell the daughter the truth.
We were sitting in the kitchen, the birth mother, my daughter, and I started the telling, and then the birth mother picked up the story and just, told her, the reason why I never had a memory of who your birth father was is because I was drugged and raped at a party, and I never knew that. But we know it now. And then the birth mother got to the point in the story where she told my daughter what he had been saying to people about her. That was the part that upset her the most. She was thinking, how dare he say these things about her and turn this into something like that? And she said, I'm going to call him right now. And I thought, whoa. We had his phone number, and she got the phone and she went outside, and she sat in the middle of the driveway. She sat someplace where she could have the absolute most space around her. And she called him. Of course, the birth mother and I go into the living room where we can look out the window, and we have the best view of watching her to see the exact moment when she finishes talking to him and when she needs us. So I'm watching her, and then I see the moment that her shoulders start to heave. I ran out to her and held her. She said, I gave him a chance to explain himself or to talk to me or something. I gave him a chance, but he had nothing to say. And I told him that I love my family and I love my birth mother, and she's an amazing person, and that he should never, ever say anything bad about her again, and that her birth mother and her adoptive family mean the world to her. It's all she needs, and he is nothing to her, and she never wants to speak with him again. And then that was it.
How has your daughter integrated this information about her birth father and the circumstances of her conception into her life? How do you think it has affected her? Do you think she's changed for knowing it?
I think that she's changed for knowing it, and I think in general, the change is a positive one, because now she knows the answer to the question. It's not an unknown. And I think when it was an unknown, it occupied more of her psyche. It was like more of an urgent question in her life, not knowing. But now knowing, even though the knowing is a story that no one would want to have, I don't think that she is as occupied with it. Every once in a while, I'll ask her, or she'll just bring it up, that it still is on her mind, and that she said recently that she knows one day she will meet him. She doesn't know what she's going to say to him, but she knows that there will be a time when she will see him. We were in the adjoining city for where he lives recently, and it was last Halloween. And she said to me, "Mom, let's go egg his house." And I thought, I just laughed because I thought that was like so healthy, like how a kid, what can I do as a kid to kind of get back at this person that done me wrong? What can I do? And I don't know. I mean, we ended up not egging his house, but I told her I was all in. If we were going to egg his house, I was there with her.
What about you? What has the impact been on you personally for finding out this information?
Well, my heart breaks more for the birth mother. I'm so protective of her, and that she has gone through this. And my heart breaks for all of the kids out there who don't know who their father is. And hopefully, with the new DNA and genealogy stuff, that kids will have an answer to those questions, and that their story can't be kept from them. And the person that needs to fear it is the rapist, because there are a lot of children who really, really want to know, who deserve to know. And they are going to be able to know now.
What happens in the dark will come to the light.
Yes. I don't regret any of it. If it hadn't have been for the DNA technology, we would not know who the birth father is. We would not know the whole story. For our family, this was something that we needed to do, that technology helped us do. My daughter wanted for her 18th birthday to know who her birth father was. And she knows that. And bigger than who he was, what his actions were, the fact that she knows his name, who he is, that fills a void for her. And he thought it was just his personal secret. But because of the DNA testing, the truth caught up with him.
After speaking with our guest, I couldn't stop thinking about all the new genetic testing and technology that's out there and how it's reshaping our lives. So with our guest's permission, I shared her story with Juan Enriquez. Juan has led companies dedicated to researching and investing in the life sciences. He founded a life sciences project at Harvard Business School, and he wrote a book on the future of genetic technology.
This story is an incredibly important story because it anchors how powerful, how important personal stories are, but also what it means to begin to enter a new genetic era.
Fascinating. So, there's this really interesting moment where the adoptive mother and the birth mother figure out the identity of the birth father, but they haven't told the daughter the background story yet. And they have this choice, which is they could tell her or they could not. And all the experts say, you got to tell your daughter. It's her right to know this story. But in a different story or in a different family, they could have decided to keep that information from the daughter as a secret. So how do you approach the question of who has the right to access the kind of information that can be revealed through DNA testing And then as past family secrets are surfaced through this technology, who does that information belong to?
Part of the issue with these genetic tests is you may choose not to take the test, but if your brother or sister takes it, it becomes hard to keep that information private. The genie on genetic testing is out of the bottle, and it's not just to find a long-lost relative. It's changing an era of medicine. This is where the notion of informed consent becomes incredibly important. When you're going through a serious clinical procedure, the doctor is supposed to sit you down and say, hey, there are real risks to this, and here's stuff you should worry about. I think in this case, it was pretty clear that the daughter wanted to know. And the question is, did the daughter ever have a sense that knowing could be very painful?
It also, it affects so much more than just you, which I think is something that I'm still wrapping my head around. Like in my head, the choice to send my DNA off to get tested to give me information back seems like the most personal decision I could make. It's my DNA, it's nobody else's. But as we know from this story, that is not the case. It has a real potential to affect a lot of other people, right? Like in our story, the daughter was very clear that she wanted to know who her birth father was, but we can't just presume that everybody wanted this information to come to light. I mean, it sounds like the birth mother had a very hard time, understandably, learning this information and grappling with this information. And it was devastating for many members of the birth father's family beyond the birth father himself. All of those people were affected by this choice. Along with the informed consent for yourself. I think a lot of what needs to go into that inform part is not only the risks and benefits to yourself, but how this might affect the information that you have and will have to decide whether to withhold or share.
I completely agree with you. And as we see more and more of these things, the scrutiny that each of our lives is going to be over, the privacy that we're losing in this, in exchange for a whole series of additional large-scale networks and connections. So it's not entirely negative, it's not entirely positive, but people have to understand that privacy is eroding, not just in genetics, and we may not realize the consequences of that for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. But we will have windows into the past that nobody's ever had before with a degree of granularity that makes the scrutiny we used to put on presidential candidates look like a joke. In many cases, that's a good thing. A lot of people did stuff they really shouldn't have gotten away with, and some of those chickens are going to come home to roost.
Our guest has a belief that people who have perpetrated rape or violence against others should be fearful of repercussions for their actions because of the transparency that this kind of technology is going to allow. It seems likely that one use of this technology could be to hold people accountable in a way we've not been able to do before.
We're going to see more transparency and more accountability, and it brings up some complicated legal questions. One of the questions, for instance, is recent instances where you have the DNA from the crime scene, but you can't tie it to a person, except that if this person's second and third cousins went through some of these databases, then you can triangulate in the same way as this family did to find who the person who did X, Y, or Z rape or murder or break-in or whatever. And that's going to become much more transparent. It's going to be an interesting debate with the right to not self-incriminate when that incrimination is tangential through your relatives. I think what's fascinating about this is at this point, we're merely talking about DNA as a diagnostic, as a time machine that allows you to look into the past, and it gets much more interesting and nuanced when you start thinking about altering DNA. Then you could see a period where it becomes normal and common to have the full gene sequence of a child, which is going to be about $100 within the next 2 years. It's going to be likely that every child is going to come out of a hospital with his or her full genome. And so the questions at that point aren't just questions about who was daddy, but it becomes questions about this child inherited X, Y, or Z. Should we edit that? Those are going to be really complicated debates because a lot of people's initial reaction right now is, no, that's not natural. That's not the way things were. That's not how the child was conceived. But on the other hand, if you knew your kid had XYZ deadly disease, I think most parents would say, if there's a good chance that you can cure this, by all means do it. In some of these ethical questions, we have to look at sometimes the consequence of acting and the risks of acting, and sometimes we also have to account for the consequences of not acting.
It's so helpful to speak with you today because I think at first glance, this story seems like an incredibly personal and unique story that belongs to one family. But based on our conversation, I think it's safe to say that even if someone hears this story and doesn't think that it is relevant to them in their life, the themes and the questions that arise from the technology at the heart of this story are going to touch our lives, whether we want them to or not.
I think the 19th century was the era of chemistry, and the 20th century was the digital era, especially in the second part of it. And now we're entering a genetics era. And becoming genetics literate is going to be an essential part of these debates.
So proceed with humility, proceed with caution, proceed with information and debate.
I'd add one thing. Don't just be scared of this stuff, right? There was that wonderful Paul Simon song about the days of miracle and wonder. And I remember what Paul Simon's talking about. The miracle and wonder back then was slow motion and the long distance call. Now they just seem like mundane technologies to us. Well, we can alter human health. We can alter human lifespan. We can cure really serious diseases with this stuff. We can prevent really serious diseases with this stuff. And not everything we do will be right. Not everything we do won't have unintended consequences occasionally. But the really important thing to understand in this is we are incredibly lucky to have these technologies and to have the choice to use these technologies. Yes, there's many things to worry about, but use 10 or 20% of your brain and emotion to worry. And use 80% to think about how you build a different world, how you make the world better, how you cure stuff. That's an era of exploration that's as extraordinary as going out and exploring the oceans or space or looking for jungles or whatever else. The era of great explorers is not over. The era of great exploration is just starting.
Sincerely X is produced by Magnificent Noise for TED and Luminary Media. Our production staff includes Kim Naderfane-Petersa, Destry Sibley, Eva Walchover, Noor Wazwaz, and Chloe Shasha, with the help of Angela Cheng, Janet Lee, Michelle Quint, Jesse Baker, and Colin Helms. Our fact checker is Lorena Aviles Trujillo. This episode was mixed and sound designed by Kristen Muller. Our executive producer is Eric Newsom. I'm Sarah Kay, and this is Sincerely X.